everyone, welcome back to a new episode of Rights for Women. It's a fabulous chat with Rebecca Saunders, who is the head of fiction at Hachette Australia. Rebecca started her career as a journalist and went into publishing in London, where she spent 15 years working at various publishers before coming back to Australia to take up the role as head of fiction here at Hachette. We chat in this interview about her publishing career, a typical day at the office, what it's like to be a very busy publisher, how an acquisitions meeting works, the role of social media, author branding, so much more. And Rebecca is the publisher for so many really well-known and successful Australian authors, including Natasha Lester, Kelly Rimmer, Kate Nunn, Joanna Nell, the list goes on, Megan Albany, who was recently on the podcast. And it was just a really great chat with Rebecca, who is so generous with her information and her time in this podcast. So grab a cuppa, sit back and settle in for the life of a fiction publisher with Rebecca Saunders. So Rebecca Saunders, welcome to Rights for Women.
Thanks, Pam. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you. I've been wanting to get a publisher on for a while to talk about so many different things, and a lot of the episodes are with authors, but I also like to do episodes that feature different aspects of the business of publishing. So It's going to be great to have a chat with you and see the answers to some of these many questions that I have. So I hope I don't bore you too long with them. But Could you fill us in to start with on your sort of publishing career and how you came to be head of fiction at Hachette Australia?
Okay, so I was a journalist in Australia for newspapers, a newspaper journalist, and I did my cadetship and stayed for a couple of years. And then I was really, really curious. I was going to travel to London, and I thought that's where like publishing is. I didn't know much about publishing in Australia. I didn't really know much about the industry or anything. I thought if surely like publishing would be London or New York. And so I was going to London to do the traveling thing. And yeah, got my first job just off the boat at a publishing company there. And I was the personal assistant to the sales director. So basically my job was to organize parties. So I'd be going to all these venues and sampling. This is the day when publishing, there were lots of parties, lots of launches, like champagne in the office and things like that. So I was, literally paid to go to like places like the Ritz and different museums and sample their food and everything and pick the venues and arrange like our conferences and things like that. And then that went really well. And so it was handled like a few accounts, like library accounts on the sales side. But I very much wanted to be an editor, work in editorial. A couple of jobs popped up at Pan Macmillan in the UK, and I applied for them, went for various interviews and was lucky enough to get a job as an editorial assistant. And that was working on the science fiction and fantasy list. I was setting up a new imprint called Tor UK, which is a really big imprint in the States, and that was setting up in the UK. That was one part of my job, and I also had another boss and worked on the non-fiction side, and he was publishing quite serious journalistic and political memoir. So I had a range. I worked on various different projects, so it was really fascinating. And then there was a gap with what the publishers were doing at Pan Macmillan. There was a gap for someone to look at younger women's fiction, and I also started like assisting the publisher there who was publishing women's and contemporary fiction. And then I found that I really loved that and published a couple of books which did well, and then was poached by another company, Little Brown, where I went to work for 8 years. So I was at Hodder, was my first job in publishing. So I was there for a year and a half in sales. Then I was at Pam Macmillan for, I think it was about 6 years, and then Little Brown for 8 years. And now Australia. Sorry, that's a very long-winded answer.
No, it's really interesting, actually.
For 7 years. Yeah, so there was many job titles. I was in the UK for 15 years in the end. So there were many job titles within that, from being an editorial assistant, and you're paid like £15,000 a year, which is nothing. And you're like living in London. So I had a job at night time as well. So I used to work for the Westminster City Council at night. So I'd go from the publishing job, and then I'd jump on the tube and get the tube down to Westminster, and then I was doing the parking fines, like writing back to people saying why they didn't have to pay their fines. We did that every day. I did that the weekend to ends meet.
Wow. Yeah. No, it's interesting to see all the different roles that you've had in the various publishing companies.
Yeah, it was great starting off in sales because you realized how important it was to have everything. Like you have to have that cover, you have to have all of this stuff for the sales team to be able to sell your book. If you don't have a cover, then you really don't have anything for buyers to make their decision on, and by that, the retail buyers. So yeah, I was like a PA, and then I was an editorial assistant, and that went to assistant editor, that went to editor, that went to senior editor, editorial director, then deputy publisher, and all that was in London. So there's much more. I found that compared to Australia, there's much more of a progression, a career progression. So there's all these steps along the way, which you don't quite see as much because Australia's smaller. It's a little bit harder. There are like fewer jobs, and you're either like a project editor, an editor, and then you seem to kind of, there's a few commissioning editor roles, and it seems to jump right up to publisher. I think that London was amazing for that, and all the things that you learn along the way. And eventually I loved my job at Little Brown, and I was a deputy publisher of an imprint there called Sphere, which is a really successful imprint. And it was just that my mum was getting older and I'd been away for so long that I thought, if I don't go now, I won't go. And I was single for the first time in a while. So and I've been thinking about it for years. And then a job came up at Hachette Australia, and it was as a publisher, as the fiction publisher, to start a new list. And I thought that was a little bit too good to not really go for. So that was 7 years ago.
Wow, that's perfect. The role was there for you, ready and waiting.
It feels like that. I feel like, because I don't think those publishing jobs don't come up very often. So if I don't try and get this, then it could be a few more years before the right role. I didn't want to do a job like less than what I was doing now. So I started, and there were a couple of authors on the list, but it was very much the publishers then were working across, like people were publishing all different kind of things. It was less like in the UK you specialize, like you might specialize in women's fiction, or you specialize in crime and thriller, or reading group fiction, or literary fiction. And how Hachette Australia was set up at the time, the publishers were publishing a little bit of everything, and they wanted to get a structure in place where they had people specializing in different areas. Eventually they created their head roles, which is, so I'm the head of fiction, there's a head of literary fiction, a head of children's, and a head of non-fiction. So people could really focus and dedicate their time to these and build a list and be responsible for that list and be responsible for the profits and the costs and everything, rather than everyone feeding in and publishing lots of different things. Although Vanessa Radnich publishes non-fiction, and she publishes literary fiction and a little bit of commercial fiction. She's has a great track record. So that's how it came to be.
So as head of fiction, like what would be a typical day for you? What would that look like, if there is a typical day?
Every day is that's one of the great things about working in publishing, because every day is completely different. I'm really obsessed with sales, so I tend to, one of the first things I like to do is like check overnight sales, and I'd like to check the Apple Books and Amazon for authors that I've quite recently published and see how they're tracking, see what position that they're at, see how sales are looking through various channels. I like to do that. I find I'm a bit obsessed with doing that. I'm just seeing how everyone's going. And first of all, it's like checking emails. It might be emails from the US or the UK to reply to with the time differences. I share a lot of authors with the UK in particular, but I think nearly all of my authors now are published in the UK as well. So they might be having back and forth with them. And then, on a Tuesday, we have our meetings. It's the big meeting day. So we have acquisition and cover meeting, and we have a production meeting, and there aren't too many meetings actually, but there isn't. I think every publisher says this, but you don't really get an awful lot of time to edit during work hours, because there's a lot more admin and a lot more other stuff preparing for things that you have to do than that people probably wouldn't expect that an editor does. Actually, you work quite a lot on the financial side as well as the creative side, and like the hands-on considering manuscripts. It's definitely done. If it's something that if I think like the agent has pitched to me, I think it sounds really exciting, then I'll pretty much try and have a look straight away. And at least read 5 pages so I know, or if it's something I'm like, I'm not quite sure about the concept, so I can maybe leave that for a few days. So it's just about heavily prioritizing everything actually, because there might be, and then if I'm getting cover concepts, I'm expecting them from a designer, that will also be one of the first things I look at, because I don't want to hold them up. So I want to give them feedback and be able to like move everything, keep everything moving along, so that we're making all these dates and not missing any dates for sell-in and things like that. Yeah, so yeah, it depends like what the priority is for that week and what meetings you might have and deadlines and so on. But there's always editing to do. There's always editing to do every week, and manuscripts to read, cover concepts to look at, or briefing covers, or launching a book, which is the first time people hear one of the first times people hear about a book in-house. And yeah, I work here. This is my office, come in my son's playroom as well. And it's lovely. It's lovely working from home. So I was working in the Sydney office until I had a little boy 3.5 years ago. So now I work from home, and I find that I love that. And I find I'm really productive working from home, because even before, I do miss like the odd brainstorm that you would have like with people. If you meet someone in the corridor and you have an idea or something, I kind of miss that with colleagues. But I find with a lot of the work, when you really do need to focus, it's great. I've just got my own little my own little area here. So yeah, that's this little bubble. My own little bubble. And I think it's such a good job being a publisher, because of that. You are doing something different every day, and you don't do the same things at the same time, which I liked. And I guess that's why I was attracted to journalism, and why I did a degree, actually, a business and communications degree, because I always wanted to be a journalist. And what I liked about journalism as well was that every day you didn't know who you were going to interview. You could be like, at one stage I was the court reporter, so you would go in and then you would just go all the different levels of the court and see what was happening that day and chase down a story. And I liked that. Or you would go into a different press conference, and kind of like that. Not every day was the same, and it's definitely not the same in books, because you're working with so many amazing people, like so many authors, and they'll have questions, and you have discussions with them, and you're always brainstorming. You're trying to think of like titles or what a cover should look like, and you're always inspired and you're always thinking, which I really like. You're always, so every day is very, very different.
That sounds amazing. And Rebecca, something I always have wondered is, where do you get the time to read all the submissions that you must get? And as well as, like you say, you're doing the editing, so you're reading over books that you've already accepted and things like that. Like, you must be doing a lot of reading in your own time, are you?
Yeah, I think before I had my boy, I was in danger of working. I think I would work all weekend, because it's a job that you really enjoy as well. Like you do, I love reading, and so it's hard. I felt it was like harder than to not work, because there's always something you could do. There's always a manuscript you could read, or there's always like something you could edits that you could fine tune. But with now that like I'm responsible for someone, I just like, he's not going to let me do work all weekend. So that's probably been quite good for me, actually. And I just try and, as I said, with submissions, I'll try and, if it's something that I think like straight away it's the concept I'm going to be attracted to, because I might know what I'm looking for or what the list doesn't have. Having said that, something can completely come along that doesn't tick any of the boxes that you expected, and you could love it. But I'll try and quickly dip in, and then it's not often that I'll read all of a manuscript, so I can make up my mind quite quickly. But if something has promise, then I will go on to read it all. So I try and do, at night time, I do everything on my phone, actually. So I look at manuscripts on the computer, but then at night, if my little boy is watching TV, I'll be next to him looking at manuscripts on my phone. And years ago, if you had told me I'd be looking at manuscripts and reading books on just a little iPhone, I wouldn't have believed you. But I'm like saving paper. I used to print out religiously in London. I would print out 50 pages of every single submission, take it home in my backpack. And so I'd have this backpack full of all, and now I'm just saving all that paper. And actually I was learning. So I thought that, that's how much you would have to read and everything to make a decision. And then you just learn along the way, learn a few things that make it easier and streamline the process.
Yeah, no, that makes sense completely. So what would be the main way, or is there a main way that you acquire new authors, or what are the different ways that you can come across new authors? There's the kind of, I guess, the way where the majority, I don't know if I would say majority, because when I started the list from scratch, I was finding stuff all over, and it wasn't, I had
a lot of authors that didn't have an agent actually. But yeah, but so I guess now most of my authors, a fair percentage of them have agents, and then other people have come through the slush pile. So someone might have, their editors might have said, oh, this person, they might not have read any, but they might have said, oh, this was a great letter or something, maybe you want to have a look at this. And then I take pictures. So I've taken pictures, the Romantic Novelists Association, I've taken pictures at their various conferences in the past, and then the Australian Society of Authors and different events where people take pictures like I try and do. And then I find that I do agree to see nearly all the pictures, because people are so nervous that I feel like it's unfair to be like, oh, I'm not that interested in that. So I do find I will and try and, I don't know, give like some kind of feedback if I can. Usually you've just sent a few chapters, but yes, things have come to me before that have been recommended from a friend of a friend. And
okay,
I know some people might roll their eyes at that, but you just never know. You never know where it could come from. Yeah, what other ways have they come? They're the main ways. So I think we've closed off our slush pile at the moment to give it a bit of a break. So I think it was quite, I don't know if it was COVID and there were more people writing or not, or if it was just
I think a lot more people were writing during COVID. And
so I think there's a bit of they've paused that to, I'm not entirely sure that the editors are accepting and, consciously reading and looking through all of that at the moment, but it'll only be like a temporary pause anyway.
Yeah. And you mentioned before, if you start reading something and the concept grabs you and you think, oh, I've got to keep reading, excuse me. But what would be the top, could you pick 3 perhaps top things that would make you then go on to buy a book? What are you looking for when you're reading those submissions?
Okay, the 3 things is boiled down to, and they seem really obvious, but it comes down to 1, do I want to keep reading? 2, I'd recommend this book to. I need to know, I could say, my sister or my friend, you'll enjoy this book. I need to know who I'd recommend it to. And if I can't, that worries me. That worries me if I can't. It might be great, whatever, but imagine putting this into someone's hands and saying, you've got to read this book because. So 1, if I want to keep reading. 2, if I know who to recommend it to. And then I think 3, it does come down to the balance of the list as well. So if I feel like I'm heavily weighted, like I'm publishing like too much, like crime and thriller or something, it won't necessarily be what I'm seeking. But then if something's amazing, it's really hard. You can try and think, maybe I can publish that a year later, whatever. But however, you'll be up against competition that can publish sooner, and most people want to be published sooner. So I think, and the tying into that is the voice. I usually fall in love with a voice. There'll just be something that will make in that voice that must resonate and make me want to turn the page, and I just want to know what happens. And because at the end of the day, if you just want to keep reading, if you want to find out what happens, it also comes down to that. So you can try and make all the other stuff work. And once I do acquire something, before I take it to acquisition meetings, I have a really good think about what I would title that book, because I would say about 95% of books when they're submitted, I would change the title. So I need to know that I work out a plan for myself, like what the title, what would be like a really saleable title, and how is the concept saleable, or how am I going to pitch it, or how do I make it saleable, because I've got to then convince all the teams that this is something that we can sell. That kind of doing those first steps to really help them. And I also want to know what it might look like, and sometimes that takes a while. I'll look at what's selling in the market. How is this different, or how is it similar, or where I think there's a gap, or it might just be inspired by lots of things like magazine ads or signs and things like that. But I think I clearly need to know where that's going to fit and who I feel like is going to enjoy that book, or else if I can't explain that to the team, then I think that I might not be the right publisher for it, because I think publishing is pretty safe, as in we do follow. So I have to be able to show there's other books in that area that are selling well, and this fits within that category, but is doing something different, there's something fresh about it. So it's one of the best in class. And it's harder to take. There might be more, like with literary fiction, there might be a bit more freedom with something that can, but I think because publishing commercial fiction and book club fiction and some light literary fiction, but I'm really ambitious about the books, and they need to get on the list. They need to sell a certain amount. And I have to feel that we can do that. And I know the channels, and I know that how I package it, like I need to get support from the 3 discount department stores. It can't just be a book for the indie sector for what I'm doing, because I'm really aiming for bestsellers, aiming to build someone from the ground up. So I look at all those things that I think if I can see if someone has what it takes. I think one of the biggest things for me, I love hard workers. I publish 2 authors. I published Natasha Lester and Kelly Rimmer, and I know that
I've just spoken to Kelly this week, actually. Yeah.
Both of them are joy, and from their very first book, their sales have both just gone like that, up every book. And what I loved about both of them is I could see from the start that they worked so hard, and I could see they were hard workers, and they got it, and they were ambitious for their books as well, and they knew what they were writing. And that to me is a publisher's dream, because you want someone that is going to work hard and is willing to do what it takes, because there's so much involved, and there's also luck is involved, but there's a lot of hard work and a lot of things involved to get to that, and to be increasing the copies that we get out there, that we print every book. And I always want to be growing. I don't want someone's sales to be growing. Knowing if an author is going to be a hard worker, or that they're ambitious for their own sales, is, I think I'm always really impressed by that. They know what they're doing, and they don't see themselves as different to what they are. Like there's some if that makes sense.
I think Natasha and Kelly are great examples of that. As you say, their books have just gotten better and better. Like I've just finished Kelly's recent The German Wife, and it's so good. I love all the books, but it's amazing. And they just get better per book as well, and it's really it's so wonderful to see that progression, and like really working on their craft and building their audiences. They're just both so wonderful at that. And it's not that someone has to come with because people often don't come with, I think that might be something that would be part of a question that you would have about in terms of when you're acquiring something, and that social media, or if that's I have got that on the list of questions actually. So how important is this? Do you actually look at authors' social media if you're considering publish them? Or
I do look at all the platforms and see if they're on Twitter, although I find Twitter quite industry facing. So there might be, if there's someone that you respect on there and they're saying, like there are a few other authors, and if they're saying they really enjoyed something, I've come to learn that I like their taste, and so then I might read that, and then I might read their tweet and then go and buy that book. But it's quite industry facing, and I find, and I think Instagram has become really popular, and authors love that, being able to post nice photos, and the Facebook still remains the kind of most interactive. But so we'll see if they're on those channels. I have to say that apart from a couple of authors, though, people that those followings have been quite small, and so we've either tried to help or just slowly built that over the time. Like Joanna Nell is another one of my authors, and that was like very her and social media, and she's just amazing at it. She's just like amazing at it. She's grown her audience, and so it definitely wouldn't prohibit me from taking anyone seriously if they weren't on social. So we have a social training course now, and I think we need to show authors the value of being on those channels, and because the authors got so much work to do with the writing and also with promotions. So the social is one more thing, and I think we have to be able to show which channel will probably be best for them, what would suit their personality the most, and that it's worth doing, and not if you spread yourself too thin, or you're trying to be something you're not, then it's not going to be the right fit. But so if someone came with this great social following and they had a newsletter, that'd be amazing. But I think a lot of the time I'll be buying first novels, and that people aren't going to come with that. So I think on the non-fiction side, that would be more important when there's a profile and all of those things. So we definitely help authors to build that up if we think it will help, rather than me just thinking that they need to come with that already, because it's not realistic, I don't think. And you mentioned acquisitions meetings and you having to get all your ducks in a row sort of thing excuse me, before you go. So
Can you give us a little insight into what actually happens at an acquisitions meeting?
Oh, okay. So for me now, so they're online, and they're done via Zoom. Now that everyone's returned to the office 3 days a week, they sit in a boardroom. And when you're a lot younger, that can be quite an intimidating setup, because there's boardroom with a very long table, and then you've got all the heads and the decision makers sitting around that, and you have to sit there and pitch your book, and you've already sent around the paperwork and you've already sent around the sample, and you have to hope that people have read a little bit of the sample and liked that material, and they'll often come and they've had conversations within their departments before, so they might have made their mind up before, so sales will have talked amongst themselves, and even people that aren't present at their meeting, they will have got colleagues to read it. Publicity will have had a little conference before. What do they think the publicity potential is with this book? And then marketing will have done the same. How would they have any ideas about marketing it? Yeah, about a week before, a few days before, you'll send around, you fill out a very complete form, and you have to give your 60-second dinner pitch. So it's just like a sentence or two about the reader, how old they might be, what other things they might watch, what other books they enjoy reading.
Okay.
And then on that form there is a thing about their social figures, putting in are they on social, do they have a newsletter, and then you've got to estimate the quantity you think you could sell through each channel. So I'll have to put down how many I think we can sell in Big W, Target, Kmart,
wow,
Mix, Indies, and then it's the salespeople's job to slash that and be like, well, no, right, we can actually. So I always try and be very realistic, and if anything, because I think I don't want those numbers changing. I've worked out, I want to be realistic, I think, for everyone, for the author and for the sales team, so they're not going in already thinking, oh, this is going to be hard. And then you write the publicity potential and the sales potential, and on that form you might envisage the cover and the pub date for that, where you might have a gap on the list, and the prices of it, and then that'll all be discussed. You pitch that verbally, and then the sales team will give their opinion on. And
it's like a verdict, isn't it? It's like you're going and presenting the evidence, and then you're waiting for the verdict type thing.
And hopefully, I'd like to do, a lot of the times if I'm sort of in an auction situation, I will do it, it all happens outside the meeting. I can't wait, because our meetings are fortnightly, sometimes they're weekly, and sometimes it seems such a long time, and if something's moving quickly, it's no way I'm going to wait the fortnight. I will share that with people, like the head of marketing, the head of publicity, head of sales, and all the different account managers, actually, and then people in the company who I think might like that book, and try and get that excitement, try and get people as excited as I am and reading it, because at the end of the day, if people are saying, oh yeah, this book is wonderful and everything, that's what you want, and that's going to help spur on the sales team as well. So I'll try and do that. As soon as I love something, I don't want to wait till that meeting. It all comes down to just this 5-10 minute discussion about and I want to be sure I'm not really taking anything to a meeting unless I know that I can get it through, unless I already know I had that support. So that's what I try and do before, and have thought of every angle that the sales team might think of as well.
So you're doing a lot of work really in preparation for those meetings, aren't you?
I do, I do. You want to, if you're serious enough about wanting to acquire something, I think you just have to have thought through and thought about the future as well, not just that one book. Is it going to be 2 books? Is it a one-off, or is it more of a punt, like something that's a little bit left field, and we just published this book, we don't really know what the author's going to do next, but I want to have had those conversations and see, do they see themselves writing something similar next time? Because if it's a 2-book contract, is really appealing, to me and to a publisher, because you're going to put all this work into the first book and really invest in all these things and all these campaigns, and so you want to get to a certain level, and then you want to grow on that. So not many authors, despite what the newspapers might tell you, not many authors have come out of the gate and are massive bestsellers. It takes years of growing, and the reason why those ones are in the newspapers is because it is exceptional and quite rare. There'll be probably a couple a year. Thinking of Trent Dalton and Pip Williams being the most recent ones, and then Jane Harper quite a few years ago. But mostly, it's, on the whole, it does take book after book, having a book,
building,
publishing same time, hopefully publishing same time every year, and building that readership, and then finding the readers for that book, and then continuing to grow on that and knowing the channels that book will sell through. So you do, I think, want to sort of, I like the idea of the long terms. It's not just one book and then you're starting again. You're already thinking of the future from that very first book. So I think that's in everyone's interest. There's some security for the author as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and what about, are you in consultation with booksellers at that time before you go into acquisitions and things? Are you getting information from booksellers as to what they think of the concept, or does that come later?
Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, that I was wondering if the sales team might, but not really. The sales team might have heard from some of their booksellers, oh, we're doing like particularly well with this book. But no, I don't. I like to, before COVID, we were doing like trying to organize quite a few like morning teas to introduce an author to like the Dymocks buying team, for example, right. Dymocks buying team and George Street, so they could meet them before selling, meet the author and kind of get a feel for, it's that one-on-one. Like it's nice for everyone. It's nice for the authors to meet the buyers. It's nice for them to see who's behind this book. But yeah, there's not, in the UK there used to be more like, if you did a further down the track, once you had a cover, call them the supermarket retailers like Tesco and Sainsbury's and Asda, they would have more power over the cover, for example. So if they thought, okay, this is all great, but this cover isn't wonderful, they would have more. That kind of changed actually, but they would be able to have a say and say, I think you need to work on this. But that's risky because that cover might work for another retailer. So it's things like going for the Richard and Judy book club, they would have a bit of, that's done through WH Smith, they would have a little bit of a say, just making sure that package is really going to work for them if they're going to pick that book. But in Australia, I've not experienced that anyway. I've not experienced that. Yeah.
And in terms of submitting their work for you to assess or to have a look at, how important do you think it is for people to do things like a manuscript assessment? Or I've heard of quite a few authors now paying a professional editor to have the book edited before submitting to a publisher. Is that something that you're finding is a fairly common practice now, or what would you say about that?
It's interesting because I think someone like that can cost a fair amount of money. So I think you'd want to be firstly really sure about who was doing that editing for you. And there are so many great editors in Australia, and making sure that you had you'd spoken to an agent, you had spoken to a publisher and someone had said, this is a great concept. This is just, so if you need to, getting over that hurdle of the manuscript not being quite ready. It's an interesting question because we do so much editing anyway for everyone. But I did recently buy a novel. It's a first novel, which I'll publish next year. And that had been edited. The agent had sent it to a freelance editor. How was a nice reputation. So when it came to me, it was like, oh my God, this is okay. So that did, and it was. And then I did hear on the grapevine that this editor had looked at it. I don't know if it was, I think it might have been in the submission letter. I can't remember, but I did also hear in the grapevine that this freelance editor and this freelance editor had thought, wow. And so immediately, because I knew who that freelance editor, I was like, okay, then I'm going to prioritize this. So there's a few, you can see how there's a few things of luck and chance in there as well to hear about it. But I think you'd want to, before outlaying that money. But I think if you're like serious about being a writer, that can only help if it's the right person editing that for you. And
because you're going to learn from that process anyway, right?
Yeah, you are going to learn from that process. And I think that just might get it over the line, because if you, as a publisher, if you receive something and you realize it probably doesn't need much editing, that's really appealing, because that's okay. We won't have to publish it. We could publish quicker than we could, because there's all those, and it'll take up, there'll be less involved in it. But having said that, things still need editing anyway. So that's an interesting question, I think.
It's just something I have heard of more recently, that people are doing that. So
I think a lot of the time an agent would be, depending on the agent, because some agents can be hands-on with the editorial process and some aren't at all. But I think you'd want to, have a bit of guidance probably from a professional, whether they would suggest that was a great idea, because if they wouldn't edit it themselves, they might think, So I do know one agent who actually does this with, I think, nearly all of her submissions. She hires, the agent does though, rather than the author. The agent hires the editor, the freelance editor, so it's in really good shape before it comes across your desk. And I think if I was a writer and I was submitting that, I just really want to trust who that was and see who that editor's vision for it, and be pretty sure that it would be helpful and that it would help it get across the line.
Yeah. Are there any things that you would say to writers to definitely not do in their manuscripts in terms of the submissions? Like, have you?
Oh, okay. Not do. If there were a lot of like spelling mistakes, say, for example, like, which just seems really in the first chapter or something, that would be really off-putting, because I would feel, if I have the sense that they haven't read that back, then that is, it's hard to take it completely seriously for me. Like, it doesn't, that stuff matters less when you get down to the editing. Like sometimes, for example, like very established authors, the character's name could change a couple of times in the book, and that's, you know, and that's okay. But if when I, like, on that submission, if it was happening with something that had been submitted and I just saw lots of errors, I would think they haven't looked at it carefully enough, and it's probably not ready to be seen yet, and why haven't they, kind of thing. I'm trying to think of anything else that is off-putting. Not really, because I think it is hard for people to see. I think it's a way of thinking to see, like, what they're writing is similar to this, and this is what it might look like. That all, I think you can't fully expect authors to come with that all ready for you, and how to market the book and everything like that. So I think if people were using a comparison, this is like J.K. Rowling, or this is Harry Potter, whatever, and that was the only comparison, I'd be a bit suspicious of that as well, because they're just using their world kind of thing as the comparison. And
is it important to have those comparison titles, do you think, Rebecca? Like, for authors to know where their work fits in terms of what's currently being published?
Oh, it really impresses me if they do. Because I think it shows that they're a reader, if anything. So it always, like, one of the questions that I always like to ask is, what are you reading, or what do you like to read? And if someone says that they don't read, or they don't read fiction, that, I guess that's another off-putting thing that comes in. Say it hasn't come via an agent and it's come through somewhere else, and I'm having a chat to the author, that's because I think to be a good writer, you do have to be a reader. And so that is something that I immediately be suspicious about. But I think an author who has a good sense of where they fit in is like the ideal. But maybe even agents and even publishers will get it not quite fitting, like something might not quite fit, and it's hard, and you might say, well, this is like this author because of this, or it's a little bit like this because of this part of the writing or this part of the story. So I think often agents will use comparisons which are very different to each other, and you're like, okay, I don't really know what that's going to be like, but there might just be like a feeling in it. They might be like tonally like someone. But I think I love even the attempt of having comparisons is good, because I kind of know what I'm going to get, which is what readers want as well. They want to have, when you're attracted to, if it's a first novelist, you're attracted to how a book looks because it makes you feel a certain way, or it might, all these unconscious things, I think. And so that, I do. So I love comparisons.
Okay, and so once it's been through acquisitions, it's been accepted, you then obviously you work on you've got a timeline for when it's going to be published. How does the editorial process work from there?
Okay, so the first thing is finessing that pub date. So you want to look at all the months of the year, see when you have all your other authors, and making sure that you're publishing at the right time of the year for this author. So you might think that'll be great for Mother's Day, or maybe they need to go a little bit earlier because Mother's Day is, very competitive, or it could be Father's Day. The biggest authors will be publishing later in the year for people that can, for that Christmas market, because that's when all the big bestsellers published from like September, October, and that's really hard. Like the retailers will stock up, they'll select their books, and there'll just be like hundreds of copies of not these few authors, but it does come down, do you know what I mean? They're sort of taking more of a few authors. So you want to I think someone's got to be sure that they can hold their own against the competition to publish at that time. But you'll be looking at, various different, there's all different reasons. There's pub dates. I shouldn't say I've got lots of theories about months that I don't like, and I will avoid stuff like the financial year and things like that. There's always exceptions to that. So I just have very like ideas about that from based on experience, the months that I think are good or are too quiet. We might not get enough publicity for stuff. And then, essentially the contract stuff can take a while. And there's a bit of back and forth and a negotiation, finesse the pub date, and then a schedule is drawn up by the project editor. So it'll be assigned in-house to a project editor, or they call it an editor, and you'll have a chat with them about how much editing. You're the only one that has probably read all of the entire manuscript at this stage, or maybe a few people have, but they won't be responsible for the editing. And so you'll have a chat to that editor about who is going to edit and how many edits it might need, and who we would like. If a lot of the time I will do the structure editing for my books. Some editors do structure, some in-house editors do, not all, but some do. And then we rely on a lot of freelancers. So we have a database of freelancers and what they like working on and what they excel at. And then it's about working out their availability. And then we'll have a think about who would be the right copy editor. Some copy editors might interfere too much, and that might not suit an author, but another author might need that really that heavy lifting. And then even having discussions about the proofreaders. So we'll hopefully try to do this earlier and earlier so we can get the right people to work on the right books. And I would say, most books need at least 2 structure edits. It might begin with a developmental edit, which is like a overview. Like I might read it and then overview of, this is what I think we're going to need to look at. And then we might get a structure editor to then really go in. So that author will have they might even go and do that work based on my developmental edit, and then it will come back and read it again, and then the structure editor will get stuck in. I think, it's at least a couple of structure edits will be needed, and then copy edit and the proofread. So it keeps coming back to the author.
There's a lot of backwards and forwards, isn't there?
A lot of backwards and forwards, a lot of deadlines. And I think, an author must be, by the time that a book becomes published, they must just be sick of the sight of it. Like just, I can't look at this one more time. And then often you probably, again, like if it is a 2-book contract, you might be having to think about when that book publishes and you're promoting it, you're also trying to write another book often, because the ideal model is publishing a book a year in terms of being able to grow your audience. Because things do sell modestly to begin with, and then you need to repeat that. So authors recognize that author will have a book at that time and they can grow. Whereas if there's a gap of a few years, it's hard to build that fan base, keep building it, because the readers don't really know what to expect and they don't know when it's coming. So publishing at the same time really helps that. Trying to be publishing like very similar month and making sure that cover as well looks like references the first cover. So you've created a style of like branding for that author. If the first book has worked, the first book has sold quite nicely, you want people to think, I enjoyed that book, and this looks like that. This looks like, that's from that author, because it takes many books until an author's name becomes familiar to a reader.
How important do you think that whole thing of author branding is?
Very
establishing yourself.
I think extremely. I think you want to, even to the fonts, I think matching fonts, a book that gives you the same feeling, the title, the author's name being in the same position. So when I say gives you the same feeling, like looking at that book and the feeling it gives you, like the cover art and everything feels like similar to what the book that you enjoyed did. So the title, I think if the first book has done well and that branding has been successful, then definitely I'm a big believer in keeping that author's name in the same place and the title. So it's all that recognition. I think people need to see things a few times and they're like, okay, and then the things will start off like, if it's a really amazing title and a first novelist, the author's name might not be big to begin with. It might be a smaller size, and you can see authors' names getting bigger and bigger.
You do notice that as the books go along, the author names get bigger compared to the title.
And that's because that recognition of author names. If you ask people if they've enjoyed a book, and they will still struggle to think of the author's name a lot of the time. Like some people, maybe not less in our circles, but if we're talking to people in the industry, but definitely friends or family, they'll be like, it'll be a few books before they're remembering that author's name and actively seeking, or it could be blown away by. I know my mum, like, she gets a lot of books from the library, and she recently discovered Catherine Elliott, who's a British author, and just loved that book so much that she went and loaned, you know what I mean? She's read about 10 of her books now, just from that. And so she recognized that name. But that's more unusual. It takes a while until people click, you know, and remember and associate that. And
and of course covers come into that whole branding thing too, don't they, Rebecca? Like how much, I guess, how much chat is there or talk to the author about the sort of cover? Because I know that, like, just the teacher, when I teach writing and people will say, oh yeah, this is going to be the cover or whatever, and I often think, no, it's not, because that's not what's going to happen when it gets to a publishing house. So what's your take on covers? And
because that kind of consultation process starts with the title, I think, and that which is going to lead to the cover. So often, as I said, like, the title will change. And so if I'm saying to an author, I don't think that title is strong enough, then it's up to me to, depending on the author, say to them, this is where I think we need to get to. We might, like, brainstorm together. Because it can take me ages to come up with the right title, because I know how important, like, title and concept and cover are kind of everything. If it's a first novel, it's just everything, because that's all people have to judge it on. That's all. You know, there might be, like, social media really helps people make decisions about books, recommendations, but if you're just walking into a store, it is going to be based on what that product, it is a product, what it looks like, and if it, you know, commands your attention in those few seconds when you're looking around. So with the cover, we have the cover briefing form, and then I have to go to a meeting and I have to brief that cover to make sure that sales and marketing and publicity are on board with my vision for the cover. So on that cover, I will have to write, like, a 1-sentence selling point. Then I give details about how I'm positioning that author. So when we're publishing, who the reader is. There are questions about what's the one thing you want the cover to evoke, what's the one thing you want people to feel, like, what's the one thing this cover needs to achieve is, like, the biggest question. And then on that form, you'll tend to give examples of covers in the competitor set. Like, if they like Natasha Lester, then they might like Kelly Rimmer. So you'll have the competitor set there, and you will have thought of the tagline, what kind of tagline you want on there, if you hope to get a quote. And then, you've got to convince the sales team that that's the right brief, so they have input then. Before I take stuff to a meeting, I found more and more that I'm sharing the cover briefs with the author, because I think never want the author to be surprised by something. And so one of my first questions, sometimes before acquisition, is asking them how they imagined the cover would look like, or even after acquisition. And then often authors will send me the covers of books, that they like. I think that's really important, because then I can have a look, and then I can either pick up the phone or email them and say, oh, okay, I see where you're coming from. This one might, or maybe that one looks too old school. Maybe, this one is probably more, has the feeling, and then tell them, and often share that cover brief so they can see what I'm going to be taking to a designer. So because if you see your cover and you get an awful shock, that's not what anyone wants, and you would never publish a book where the author hates the cover. I think in the US, they have a lot less say about covers, but sometimes you have to convince that this is the best cover, and this is like, that there has to be an element of trust that published books before that have been successful, and this is what's happening in the market. And because a lot of people who kind of see things differently, and a lot of authors want to have input into the cover process, and a lot of authors say, no, I don't have that visual sense. I'm very happy to leave it to you guys, because you guys know what you're doing. And then I'll brief the designer, have a chat with the designer. I started working with this amazing designer who reads all the books, which I find not all designers like have the time to do that. I just love, she reads them all. And so the concepts she's been sending me, she'll get it spot on. She might send about 20, but there'll be one in there that's got the potential and can be worked on. Whereas often it can take months back and forth and things changing. It's one of the most fun things to work on a cover, but it also can be one of the most stressful when it just doesn't somehow come together, and something's just not right, or the sales team don't see it, or it just doesn't, you think, yeah, it can be, and it can take a long time, and you've got to have it ready for selling. You've got to, and it is so important. So I think I also like to show, depending, sometimes this changes, I always do like to show an author a couple of my favorites, or couple of my favorites before the cover meeting, because if I take something to the cover meeting and everyone's, yes, this one, we love that one, then it's very hard then the author feels like they have to agree with it. So I think I want to know that they can see what we're doing. If they personally don't love it, but they're like, yes, okay, I can promote this, I see where you're coming from, and then that's okay. But so I think, yeah, it's definitely good to have that consultation all along the way, because it can lead to, covers can be a really tricky area.
Yeah, because I think as an author you have a bit of a vision in your head, as you're writing, and when you finish the book, of what you think it will be, and if it's too much of a shocker, you just have to adjust to it. But it's so important, isn't it? Because like you say, the title and the book, when a reader walks into a bookstore or sees something on social media, you really want to grab them with that image. Like title, concept, one sentence pitch has to do the job. You have to be able to, and people see immediately. I love titles and covers that tell a story, particularly titles. So I am a fan of quite long titles, actually. So if it tells a story and invites you in. If something might be the most beautiful cover, and sometimes I just can't, it doesn't invite me in, and I can't even explain what I mean. So I have to keep working on it to make sure it's really clear to what it is, because we've read the manuscript and we know what it is, and then we might be impressed by a beautiful cover, but for a reader who they don't know what that book, they're just relying on what you're telling them on that front cover and on that back cover. So I like showing like friends or family that are just completely nothing to do with publishing, I haven't read the book, and just say, what do you think when you look at that, or what do you do like that? I bother my mum a lot with that, because she's a big reader, and it's really great getting her opinion. It's good you've got someone like that you can bring in. Terms of sales, Rebecca, what would be considered today in Australia, for instance, a bestseller?
That's at the moment. And do you mean like a weekly sale or a total? What would be a total? Because
when they say, best-selling author, blah blah blah, what for one book title, what would be considered a good number in terms of sales?
To put that, I guess it can be a little bit like, to put that label, the best-selling label, it might be that it could be it was in the top 10 for a week or something like that, or it could have. So it doesn't necessarily, we don't have a chart in Australia like we do. The individual newspapers have a best-selling chart, like they'll have their kind of top 10. I like in the UK and the US has the New York Times, and they have that definitive kind of list, and in the UK they have the Sunday Times. Don't really have that in Australia, but we have, everything's based on Nelson Bookscan, so books through the till. And so something that the best-selling tag can be applied to things that might not be recognized as a bestseller to most people. So there's no kind of, if you sell 5,000, then that's a
there's no magic number.
It might be, it's probably based on like on a weekly thing, if they like hit the charts for a certain time, or if they, and then that might be in Australian fiction rather than the entire chart. I do like to separate out and all the editions in Australia in the charts, so like hardbacks against trade paperbacks, non-fiction with fiction, and kids and everything. So I like to separate out like for like they do in other countries. So I think that's more of and then be able to tell people, like in trade paperbacks, you've the 4th biggest selling author, and I'll try and give that information, like including US and UK authors, but also against Australian authors. So I think it's nice to know how you're selling against the authors in your country as well, and not taking out the smaller formats as well, which are like a lot cheaper, and giving a like for giving context to how.
And what sorry, I've just lost my train of thought in terms of the next question, but how important is it for that first book, for a debut author, to sell really well, like in terms of their overall career?
If they do, and that's the exception rather than the rule. I would, there's so many things have to come into play for that to happen, and it does take, timing can be really key and everything. I think and this is probably like hearing about the financial side, but you just want to have something doesn't need to have had like thousands and thousands of copy, but I think that first novel to give you an encouraging base where you can think, okay, we did this, now how are the retailers going to feel? Because it'll all come down to for support for the next one. We need to, like, will we get support from Big W again? Will we get support from Target? Oh, they got Target with lots of returns, so we won't get them next time. Okay, who are we really believe in this author, so we're going to have to focus on driving sales through this retail, and then like fully looking at how it was packaged. Was it the right package? Was it the right title? Where did we go wrong somewhere? Could something have been different? Could have been published at a different time? Looking at all that and making sure you've really done a proper 360 on that, and then addressing all of those things, because you believe in this author. You wouldn't have acquired this novel and you wouldn't feel ambitious about them, and you're responsible for the author's career, so take it like very, very seriously. So you want to look at all those factors and you think, okay, how can we, like, so maybe we won't get Target, we might have to tweak the cover a little bit so it's going to appeal to, you know what I mean, like high street. And then if the sales for the second book then have improved on the first book, you can then go back to some of those retailers that had a lot of returns and say, we looked at this and we've got a better cover, we've got a better title, we've packaged it better, like we really want your support, and we're going to invest in, we spend money for the position the book will be in shelves and in catalogs and things like that, and be willing to invest our money on it, and telling what kind of marketing and publicity campaign we'll have behind it. If a book doesn't hit the bestseller charts from the very first off, that isn't the be all and end all, but that if it does, that's simply amazing. But you just want to make sure that people that you keep in-house slow, you keep everyone's confidence up, and you get them even more excited about book 2, because they're like, we're in it for the long run, so you've got to keep and just be really very realistic with yourself and what you've done and what you could have done better, and then to be able to relay that to the sales team as well, like your theories about things, and they'll have them too, so that you're just not repeating the same thing or just giving up or anything like that.
Yeah. And what about in terms of genre, Rebecca? If an author sort of a few books in wants to go in a new direction, how do you feel about that, and how do you manage that?
It all depends per author and what they're writing and what their sales have been like. It is with the kind of publishing I do, because it is commercial, it is chasing those bestsellers. People like to know what they can get, so you're in danger. I think some authors might feel that they're writing the same book every time, just with the same but different. But we all like to know what we're getting, and you do the way that you build that fan base is they know how this author is going to make them feel reading that book, and they know they're going to get a page turner, or they know. So if someone changes genre, it depends how dramatic it is and how. So if someone's writing contemporary women's fiction and they change to crime thriller, I know I think this in the UK there was domestic noir and authors, there were a lot of women's fiction authors who then started to write in that crime thriller space and had huge success. And there was a tipping point, like Girl on the Train. There was one book before that was that kind of started this genre, and it just opened the space for those authors to do that, and now they're bestsellers in that area. Whereas in a couple of years before, I'm sure the publisher would have been urging them not to change, readers expect this from you. And so I think if there's some commonality in the new direction, that can help as well. If it's still, say it was a historical novel and it's going to become a historical thriller, I think see how that could be smooth there. So I think if the new direction or the new thing they want to do, if it's really good, then it's convincing everyone that it's really good. But it's a tricky one, because you're almost, depending on the author and where they are, you're almost starting again. You've invested all this in building their name and their brand, and if that's changing, then it's are you starting again, or can you take some stuff from that and keep some of the branding, or how can you so there's a lot involved in that, actually. It's not I think sometimes it can be a shock to authors, because they do want to write different things, but then that's really hard for us to market, or just more challenging, because then the next book be very different. And I think if there was commonality, like it's romance, there's just different romance, then I think and if that author has the nice sales behind them, then I think the readers, and their name is recognizable, the readers will follow them. But there's more challenges involved.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And what would you say is selling well in Australia at the moment? What's popular?
TikTok. The TikTok books are taking over the charts. So the authors like Colleen Hoover, we have an author called Sally Thorne who's Hating Game.
Oh, I love Sally's books.
Incredibly. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I've read them all. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, excellent. I'll have to tell her. And yeah, she's the biggest Australian author in that what's called the book talk or the TikTok. And that is what, if you go into all the bookstores now, you'll see B formats like mass market paperbacks, front of store, and it's young girls, they're going and they're buying, which is amazing. It's great because we know that young people don't read as much.
Brilliant. My daughter is suddenly this avid reader because she's all over social media in terms of, you know, and on TikTok and all that. And she's just devouring books. It's fantastic. Isn't
it great? Isn't it great? So that's like the charts, all the TikTok authors, all the charts, and the bookstores have their special sections devoted to that. And so it's really encouraging that it has pushed a lot of more traditional authors out a little bit because they're honestly the numbers, the sales for these books are really fantastic. Actually, they're really great. So yeah, that's what's selling in Australia at the moment. And
so there's specific genres that you think are selling better because of TikTok, like Sally's sort of rom-com, isn't she?
Lots of romantic comedy is actually, and then Colleen Hoover writes across genres, and so she has like more kind of can have more thriller packages, and I think people are just going to buy anything that she writes really. But so definitely romantic comedy is doing really well. And Taylor Jenkins as well is another one who's had like the Daisy and the Six.
Daisy Jones and the Six.
Daisy Jones,
and then the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo.
Yeah. So she and obviously she had her success. The Daisy Jones was selling before TikTok, but then it's been picked up by TikTok. So this is Safe for the Hating Game. Like Hachette published that, you know, quite a few years ago. And it's come back into the charts. And it's just selling, and every week it's selling more, selling hundreds of copies. And that's, and it's nice that it's in print too. The ebook sales are good, but the print sales, it's been this revival. So it's nice to hear about your daughter. That's like clear example.
I'm blown away. I'm constantly asking her now, what are you reading now? What are you reading now? And a lot of it is, it's definitely stuff she's picking up from Book Talk. She's now working her way through all the Colleen Hoovers, and she's loving it, which is great.
Yeah. It's really encouraging, isn't it? I think I like if you go into a bookstore and you like teenage girls buying books and you think, oh God, we'd like all these things and all these theories we have about that age group not buying books. It just takes like those recommendations from channels that they respect and admire. And so that's been this last year and this year, that's what the bestseller charts are full of.
So would you recommend that authors get onto TikTok? Is that something that you see as an important social media thing at the moment?
It's really interesting because we're trialing something at the moment, and it'll be interesting to see if you can't manufacture this kind. I don't think you can manufacture.
It's quite a specific platform, isn't it?
Yeah. And it might seem quite contrived. And I think we're working, the marketing team are working with a person from TikTok, and we've just selected like a sample of authors and asked them if they wanted to be involved or not. And authors that, there's really quite, because they're like a younger readership, and you were thinking of books for the younger market, but then there are authors of cookbooks that are doing, like Michael Mosley is doing really well on TikTok, but I guess he's got the recipes and the contact. He's doing really well. So that was okay, maybe it's not just all about that young reader, and maybe there are other, so there's going to be a trial, and some authors just definitely didn't want to get on there like that, and that's fine. I can understand that. Been on, and then some authors are going to give it a shot. So I'll let you know how it goes, because I think everyone's going to have a good time out of her. But
it'd be really interesting. There's an author I follow on Instagram called Zoe Lee, and she writes, she's a UK author, crime thrillers, and she's really great at Instagram. I've had her on the podcast about that, but she had a post the other day about, since she's been on TikTok, she'd actually charted her book sales since she was doing TikTok posts.
Oh, right.
And it was really interesting to see the graph. The peaks in sales every time she posted on TikTok.
Wow. Okay. Okay, I'll look into that. I'll listen to that podcast actually, because I'll be intrigued to see what she did and how.
Well, I spoke to her a while ago about Instagram, but this was just a post she had recently on TikTok about her own sales. Yeah,
I'll let you know, because some of the authors that kind of are in this sample that we're going to trial are from crime thriller to historical, and no one's in that bracket, that age bracket of what we consider to be like what TikTok bio, the TikTok bio might be. So it'll be interesting to see that. It seems to me there's some evidence that it's not just that younger readership, but I think there is we've had a bit of conversation about looking for TikTok authors, but again, I think you can't thrive that. What are the magic ingredients that will make someone really popular and everything? So it just might be things that are selling like TikTok authors are selling one. There might be other authors writing similar stuff, might be like the way in. I definitely, because it'll be
I'd love to hear about that.
I've never been on TikTok myself.
I'm on there, but I'm lurking.
Okay.
I think my daughter did a couple of way back when my last book came out. She did a couple of posts for me, just the ones that show the books and things like that, without me actually my face being on it. But we'll see.
Right, she can show you the way. She can, she'll know.
My social media manager would be great.
Yeah.
Rebecca, I really appreciate the time you've taken. I've just got a couple more things I wanted to ask you, and I know that listeners would not be happy if I didn't ask you, are you looking for anything in particular at the moment?
Oh, okay. This is probably a strange answer, but I would like to find something a little bit left field, or something a little bit unusual, or across genre. Or I think in these times when, the world has been in a weird state of flux for a couple of years, and I think, I don't know, with an election approaching, I think there's I just have this feeling about something I can't actually describe it other than being maybe cross genre, something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, which doesn't help, but probably doesn't fit any set.
Right.
Doesn't fit any genre. It's something that I could see working well, and something that I don't have on the list. Like I have, because I think, there's nothing, that's interesting. There's nothing, like I was always after looking for an Australian crime thriller author. I was looking for years and years. I wanted to buy Jane Harper, was one of 10 publishers. And so since then I was looking for someone, and then I found and just published Wake by Shelley Burr, which just published this week.
I've seen that.
And that was my and then I've got my crime thriller authors and historical fiction, and then contemporary. So there's not this, usually I'm writing these board reports about gaps I see in the list, and I don't see a really big gap, other than I think probably there's not like a big obvious gap. So I guess I'm pretty open to something, just falling in love with something and going for it. Like it's not, wouldn't be ruling anything out at the moment. I know that's very non-specific, isn't it? But it's just how the shape of the list. Like I tend to publish probably about 2 debuts a year, I would say. This year, which I just published Shelley Burr, and I published Megan Albany, the very last list.
Oh yeah, Megan was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
So they're my 2 debuts for the year, because I think you could probably be room for perhaps one more, but I think any more than that, all the energy, like everything, you want to publish things in a big way. I think try and have that excitement. So have these big campaigns, and you can't do that. You've already got your established authors who need all of that as well. So I think things that are new and whatever, I think it's usually I probably have about 2 a year. So next year I have 1 debut next year so far, actually, and that is the book that I mentioned that was already edited, actually, but we're doing more editing. But that's an amazing book, which is set around a cluster of funerals in Sydney one spring, and that is a beautiful book. And so for next year, that is my only debut at the moment, actually, because the list is doing really well and everyone's got their spots. I definitely don't want to be competing with authors I already have. So there you go. So I think then I definitely do have capacity for another first novel next year. Yeah.
And just to wrap up, Rebecca, what advice, what do you think is the most important thing for a new writer, a writer who's got a manuscript or working on their first manuscript wanting to be published, and then also maybe a more experienced author who's mid-career or whatever? What sort of advice would you give to each of those different authors?
In terms of getting published?
I guess in terms of the writing itself, and then in terms of getting published.
I think to start with, For a first novelist, I think the advice would be, making sure, I think you've got your biggest shot when you've got that submission. So just making sure that you have read, you think that book is the best it can be. You've done your homework and you've done various drafts of that book. And I think having readers, you're part of a book group, and having people in that book group read the book and give you feedback along the way, I think that would be really invaluable, because I think you've got this big shot if it's going to get in front of a publisher. I think, so making sure that it really is in the best shape it can be. I think attending some of those pitching events is great, having your pitch really fine-tuned. So that's a way, if you don't have an agent, to get on a publisher's desk, because there's often at these events, there'll be publishers from different companies, and so then you have a shot to be considered and to be read. And then it might be that they want 1 chapter or 3 chapters, and so making sure they're excellent. And making sure you, I think, read and know what's selling, and visiting bookstores. I think visiting bookstores, so you can, and what a publisher publishes, I think, is another thing that I'm always really impressed by, I think. And for experienced authors, advice on their writing, or
just in terms of their career, like managing their career, maybe.
I think deciding what you want out of it might be like a really, is the goal to, I guess everyone's goal is to be able to make money. Is the money side important, that you want to not have another couple of jobs to be able to support the writing? Is that goal to get somewhere where you can write full time? And if that is the goal, where if the goal is not just publication but it's having this ongoing career, then I think it becomes even more important to know your reader, and to really know your reader, and to know like a little bit, and just working with someone, and your publisher can do this, or your agent, if there's a nice connection there, and you can just, hopefully they're talking to you about your aspirations, and if you're approaching it a little bit more like a business, if you want that to be the way that you make your money, because it is really hard until you start earning royalties, and then hopefully you're published abroad and that brings more income, but it can take a long time. I think a lot of authors, it depends what you're in it for, because some authors are more attracted to their writing being recognized and prizes and so forth, and don't expect to make a living from it. So I think working out what you want from it, so your expectations are managed, and being able to talk to your publisher about it too, and your agent, and everyone having a conversation. Everyone's like, where are we going together? Where do we want to get to? And just being really frank about it. I think that's and be willing to work hard. I think everyone, have those conversations and talk to people, and just be willing to, going to be the biggest promoter, the biggest champion of your book besides your publisher. Your publisher will be the next, but if you want to, put that work in, then there is a lot of extra work that goes with it besides the writing. And so it's, being able to manage time. But I think the first thing would be working out, why you're doing it, what you want from it. I think. That's great advice.
We have chatted for so long. It's been really good. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
It's been lovely to talk to you.
Yeah,
lovely.
It's really great to catch up. So thank you very much, and all the best with the rest of the year. Now, hopefully we're getting out of the COVID zone and getting to book events. It's been great. I've been to a couple of book events lately. It's just so nice to get out and see people face to face again.
There's no comparison, is there? It's just, we've had a couple, and I had one with Megan Albany, which just happened to be down, like I'm on the Gold Coast, but it was just down the road for me. It was amazing to see her in person. And then we had a crime thriller night in Brisbane with a few authors, and then booksellers, and it was sort of nothing compares to that. I think it is being able to plan tours this year is fantastic, planning tours for authors. But we'll see. I think the market is a little bit tough at the moment. I think we definitely, if you had authors on the list who had already had a few books out and had a following, I found that with my list benefited from already having their fan base, and their sales did really nicely, and it was a lot harder for first novelists. And I think now with people out more and everything, there's more competition for time. So I think this will be a tougher year sales wise, but I'm always a bit too, I'm always don't count my chickens. So we'll see. I think we'll see how, fingers crossed.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Rebecca.
Okay, thanks, Pam. Thanks a lot. See you later.